Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends Sam Clement and Courtney Trush. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, John.
Hey, how are you?
Doing great.
Fantastic. You know something, as awesome as things are here in central Alabama, particularly at Oakworth Capital Bank, a lot of people across the country have a lot of woes because, let's face it, there's shortages of just about everything. And one that I just am so baffled by is this baby formula shortage.
Yeah.
So how did we get here, Sam?
Well,
I mean, why is there not enough baby formula? It seems to be a pretty simple thing.
Well, I think it's just one of, all these kinds of things that are either prices skyrocketing or for some reason a kind of head scratcher, you can't find it. And I think that's just a culmination of a lot of kind of errors and mismanagement.
What do you mean by errors and mismanagement?
Government errors and mismanagement.
Yes, that's what I wonder. Are you talking about the company?
We're not going there. I mean, unless you have really just not been reading the news at all, you have probably know that Abbott Labs is one of the largest makers of baby formula in the United States. I think it's 40% of the market, if I'm not mistaken. And for whatever reason, FDA thought that there was some type of virus or bacteria at the plant, and for all intents and purposes shut down the plant, and Abbott did a voluntary recall on all its products. The FDA did not make them do a recall, but they had to do all these searches, and it was proven that maybe this virus bacteria just really wasn't endemic inside the factory, couldn't prove that Abbott caused it, and for whatever reason, they've only just recently gotten the okay to reopen the plant.
Well, and it's such a unique good, or I guess in one of those things that it very much is going to cause a panic when it's not there. I mean, there's some things, that...
My baby's going to die.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that you can say, okay, I can live without that. We've talked about chicken at times. Like, yeah, okay, you can't find that. But if you can't find baby formula, the second you do find it, you're probably going to buy all of it.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's a huge panic around it, and so that exacerbates any sort of issue with any sort of shortage and inflation in that good, and so that's an issue on top of it.
Well, this just kind of leads to sort of my contention that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, if you catch my drift. The FDA was not trying to cause any problems. The bureaucrats at the FDA were undoubtedly thinking that they were doing something in the public good, but for every action there's a reaction, and when you shutter a ton of domestic production, it's going to lead to shortages, and shortages always lead to price increases.
Well, and it seems like that's a common theme is governments, not only here, but kind of everywhere, maybe being short-sighted or not really following that path down what the consequences are going to be.
But on the flip side of that, right, you also wouldn't want potentially there to be death of, infant children if there really was a threat. And obviously knowing that demographic of young children are probably more susceptible to if there is something wrong in the formula.
I mean, no argument.
But let me play devil's advocate. Here I am talking about hell and good intentions, and now I'm playing devil's advocate. People going to wonder about my theology. Any event, who has more of a financial incentive to make sure that the baby formula is actually safe, Abbott or the U.S. government?
Abbott.
Well, of course. So why would Abbott want to produce product that kills children?
Well, of course they wouldn't want to. I mean, just like Jif. Jif's not going to want salmonella in their peanut butter.
So are you making the argument, Courtney, that the government knows better than the manufacturer?
No, I'm not making that argument.
Well, that sounds like
it. Sure sounds
but
like
I'll
it to me.
But I'll also go back to even when we started regulating the meat industry or food industry in general, there is good intentions behind it. You're going to have, I think that's like the push-pull. Is it worth the additional risk of them being slow to action, making sure, I guess, they're doing their full due diligence before being reactive? Versus, how many children's lives could potentially be lost if they felt like that was... this is something that you're consuming. It's a little different to me than a plastic toy that could potentially have a piece that you could potentially... You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, this is obviously something that's being consumed.
I think she lost me there for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Am I going too far down the road?
I'm just teasing about that. But that is really just kind of one instance where I would say government overreach or the government bureaucrats not really understand the cause and effect. Good intentions, not understanding what their actions would lead to, what the reaction would be if you close down arguably the largest domestic manufacturer of baby formula, understanding that baby formula by regulation has to be produced in the United States.
Did you not say that Abbott chose to recall?
Abbott chose to recall it, but the FDA shut down the facility, if my understanding of the situation is correct. So, however, what do you think would have happened had Abbott not been willing to recall its product? I would imagine the FDA probably would have gotten around to doing that as well. But that's just kind of one instance, and not to dwell on this particular one, but there are instances throughout history where good intentions have led to horribly ironic economic results. Another one recently, and maybe not as close to home, is the economic implosion of the country Sri Lanka, where last year the government, in its best of intentions, declared that the entire agricultural industry had to go to organic farming. Absolutely organic farming, overnight, no grace period, anything like that. And the Sri Lankan farmers didn't have access to the right type of fertilizers, and what happened next is just about a crop failure. Now, since a huge chunk of that economy is dependent on agriculture, this has led to just things completely collapsing.
But this isn't unique or, a new problem either. I mean, there's a constant in history, countless examples of government policies across the world doing things that are essentially short-sighted, and they're it seems to be more focused on the short-term reaction to this versus the long-term consequences of it. And I think one that John, I think you'd agree with, the Nixon price controls. I mean, that was at a point before an election.
Very politically popular.
That's what I was about to ask.
Yeah, exactly. Extremely politically popular, conveniently before an election.
Right.
I mean, but it had awful consequences.
Yes.
But they were more focused on the short term, and people were excited. The markets rallied off of it. I mean, things were good while it was going on. And that seems to be the crux of the issue, that the government, people are, I mean, they're really most concerned about themselves, and
Sure.
and that's never going to change, or that's really hard to change.
Without a doubt. And I would say, Courtney, I'm going to make Courtney upset here, I think, with this one is, Courtney, don't you think the U.S. government should be punishing Russia for invading Ukraine?
Yes, I believe if you listen to our podcast on my opinion of the government sanctions, I thought we should go in hard and fast. Because I thought that way you just nip it in the bud. And it seems like the U.S. government did not do that. And now here we are, however many weeks later, giving sanctions that don't seem to make any difference.
Well, I would say they actually do make a lot of difference, because it's not just the United States putting sanctions on Russia. A lot of other countries have as well. And this has threatened the export of fertilizer from Russia, who is a major producer of urea. It's a thing. Potash, amongst other nitrogen products. And also, I mean, Russia is, essentially the world is trying to keep exports out of Russia, and Russia's retaliated itself. You're going to put sanctions on me, I'm going to put sanctions on you, and now they're blocking the export of certain agricultural products and what have you.
But is the war still going on, John?
The war is still going on, but what we're also seeing is commodities prices go higher and higher still, and food inflation seems to be no signs of abating in a lot of ways. So political pressure, and arguably the right thing to do, the best of intentions, putting sanctions on Russia has led, arguably, in my estimation, to a lot of uncertainty about global food production and global food prices. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, heck, even take tariffs from a few years ago, or tariffs in general. I mean, this is something that any economist just about would argue that does not have good consequences in the long run, and people still continue to tariff other countries, and they sell it as this protecting their own kind of thing, and it never helps.
But I also think it goes back to like our political, just what we've created with politicians, right? Because it used to be that, at least for the United States government, that you were representing the people, and that there was never intention of having career politicians. And now, to your point,
at least in thought,
right? In thought, that really wasn't supposed to be something that people did as a career. And now you do have career politicians, and their sole, like to your point, their sole focus is just getting reelected and saying what they have to say to get reelected. And so people are saying what's flashy and new or what sounds good because they don't want to upset their possibility of being reelected.
So what you're saying is the whole system is based on sound bites and 2-year election cycles, and these people who are focused on those things are also making economic policy.
Yes, John.
That might keep me up at night. Sam, your thoughts?
That would keep me up at night. It should. But we've had career politicians like forever.
For a very long period.
I mean, there's a joke that it's the second oldest profession, and it has a lot in common with the oldest.
That'd be farming?
Yeah, no, not exactly. But you get what I'm saying. I mean, it's people are inherently self-serving,
Right.
and it's when you have to be elected. I mean, you are trying to be self-serving through selling yourself to other people, and it's harmful.
Yeah. The thing is, and I've said this plenty of times, maybe not necessarily here on this podcast, for every regulation, there's a cost to it. For every restriction, every ban, every something like that, there's going to be a cost to it. So when the government does something like a price freeze or curb exports or ban things from other countries or big tariffs or all that stuff, there's going to be a cost to it. That's just an economic slam dunk. There's going to be some kind of cost to it, even if it is politically popular. And so people are, like you said, they always want to vote with the wallets, the shiny new thing, what have you. And what might be good in the short term can oftentimes lead to disastrous long-term results. Sort of like what happened within Sri Lanka and maybe what's going on with the baby formula shortage here, and any number of them. So that's a concern.
Well, and I think people are just very reactive, right? They see an issue. We've talked about that with the market. You know, people get so fearful that they immediately react. I mean, there's other things that happen daily where people are like, okay, well, this happened, cause and effect. Okay, that's it. We're going to do away with all of this. And they don't look at, to your point, they don't look at the long-term effects, and also, was there another factor? I think people sometimes are so black and white that they don't see that maybe there were other factors in play that could have prevented, Abbott could have prevented the whatever was in the formula that they thought was in the formula that could have caused danger to children. So I think that's my hesitation. And I also think, obviously, the 24-hour media cycle doesn't help because they're doing sound bites, it's quick videos, and the American public, we're so quick to get information, bits and pieces, and we don't always have the whole picture before we're making up our minds and, sharing our strong opinions one way or the other without all the facts.
I think it also doesn't help that a lot of the people making a lot of these rules don't have any expertise in these areas, and we talk about everything having a economic consequence to it. Most people in politics don't have an economics background, and so a lot of times you have people
got an inordinate number of lawyers.
Yeah, I mean it's lawyers and political science people, which is fine. But when you start gearing yourself towards making economic decisions, that's problematic. That'd be like me making medical decisions for someone. That's probably not a good plan.
Right, but I would argue that a lot of plans or a lot of and I mean I this is just from my experience, but there are very intelligent people in our government as well, that it's not necessarily the people who are elected that are the ones, to your point, that have all of the facts or that need to have that knowledge, but they should surround themselves with very competent and knowledgeable people, which from my experience was the case.
But who was telling Nixon that it was a good idea?
I didn't work for Nixon, so I can't speak to that.
I did not say you did. But you have Milton Friedman over here, the essentially best economist of all time, I would argue, saying that this is an awful idea, and you have a bunch of people politically motivated doing something that ends up causing just massive amounts of harm to the U.S. economy. I mean, who thought that was a good decision economically?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go back to Courtney's point about there being intelligent people, and there are plenty of intelligent people in Washington. I used to live there, after all.
Once you left, all the intelligent people left.
But that doesn't mean that the intelligent people in Washington also don't get into the problem of being political themselves. So
Right,
you have
right.
a bunch of staffers that might have advanced degrees from prestigious universities, but if they're not having to make a budget, if they're not having to, you know, worry about an income statement and, you know, raise revenue or what have you, they're not going to think like a business person or even like necessarily an economist. They're going to start thinking more like a politician themselves. So I do think there are a lot of bright people in Washington, but they're bright in their areas of expertise and not necessarily economics. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something I think a lot of people see in the investment industry is really smart people in different fields do really dumb things. I mean, and that's
Yeah.
not unique to the investment industry, but it's one that I think people see a lot and you can quantify real well. But again, it'd be the same thing as me with no medical degree and no medical background starting to do diagnostics. I mean, that's not going to work well.
What do you think about that, Courtney? Do you think Sam should be doing diagnostics?
Me doing diagnostics
No comment
and
on.
then running for Surgeon General.
Yeah.
So here we are. We've got a lot of problems in around the world. A lot of higher prices, potential shortages of this and that, and it keeps coming down to me in a lot of ways. Huge chunk of it is because of governmental action in some form or fashion, and it's not necessarily the fault of the private sector that a lot of this stuff is happening.
Do you feel like you would blame, I mean, or not you specifically, but that the American people are going to blame the government either way? Like, basically, you damned if you do, you damned if you don't.
I would say that depends on where you live. I would say people in Alabama would probably blame the government. I would say people in certain areas of the West Coast would probably blame big bad business.
It's the Putin price hike.
You know, that type of deal. So I really do think it depends on where you live and what your general thought process is about government and its role in our daily lives.
But elections tend to revert back to how the economy is doing. I mean, when the economy's doing really well and overall people are pretty happy, I mean, typically those people
They
don't
just want
lose
to keep
elections.
it the same. Yeah, they want to keep it as it is.
Yeah,
Because those politicians get credit for the economy doing well.
yeah.
So I guess what we're saying is, gee whiz, what's going to happen in the midterm elections? I mean, Courtney, what are your predictions?
I think that we'll see some change.
The look of terror on her face when I asked that question was priceless. Sam, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, I think you and I would agree, maybe Courtney not so much, that government often has the best of intentions, and they more often than not lead to ironic results when it comes to the economy.
I think most government policies have an ironic outcome to it. Not just here. I mean,
It's what the government's not supposed to have any policies?
No, maybe
mean,
they
what
need
are
to be
they-
like
what are they
George
there for?
Costanza and do the opposite of what they want to do. Maybe that would work out a little better. I mean, you go back
You
to
are
the,
a very different representative of
He
your
is.
generation.
you have
It's
the
not-
Great Leap Forward, like they're trying to get rid of pest and then they have locust outbreaks. I mean, it's a slam dunk that there's going to be an ironic outcome
Oh
to
gosh!
pretty much.
Speaking of that, you talking about Mao's sort of great leap forward. Was that it?
Get rid of the sparrows.
Get rid of the
Funny enough,
sparrows.
they ate all the locusts, and then you have a biblical locust outbreak after.
That's actually pretty interesting reading.
Yeah,
Courtney, what do you think
awful
about all
times,
this?
but
I mean, I think that the government is there for a reason, and I feel like we have a different perspective with the type of work that we are all in. Might kind of be specific to our personalities, and it might be specific to our where we, geographically live. That we have the feelings that we have. I
we all
don't
live
think.
pretty close to each other.
I
Yeah,
mean,
not that far
living
away.
in the South.
Couple miles.
I feel like Sam doesn't necessarily represent a large majority of people his age. I could be wrong, but I don't really know that you do.
What are you trying to say, Courtney?
You're pretty conservative for being at your age. But no, I do think the government's job is to do what's in the best interest of the population. So
And I would say, and I think Sam would actually agree with me on this, you're right. And the best thing the government can do in order to help us all out is what, Sam?
Stay out of things.
okay, to some,
But
to
so
some
I would
degree.
almost argue that their job isn't to do what's best for the people. I think their job is to stay out of it and let people do what's best for people.
And
So
here
then
we
everything
are.
should
So
go.
maybe we're trading perspectives.
Yeah. I
Here we
think
are
we
trading perspectives, I think.
I mean, by no means
Bill of
am
Rights
I.
and throw that out the
Yeah,
window.
by no means am I saying that I think we should be highly regulated, and but it goes back to also like, do you want a state-controlled issue, and then maybe you're looping all government into one big bucket. But ultimately, if certain allocations aren't made and roads aren't being paved quickly, or you don't have access to certain things, you will want regulation to be put in place so that you will get access to that, because you're like, I'm paying tax dollars, where am I seeing it?
I already feel that way.
Okay, well,
You don't? I'm not sure if we're going to do any good by talking any longer on
Yes,
this.
I know.
So we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. Drop us a line at trainperspectives@oakworth.com, or leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. Also, if you're interested in reading more, hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, please go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of exciting information. With that, I think I'm just going to give Sam last chance here today.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Courtney,
you're not going to ask me, John? That's all I have.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.